Hank.
All right, appreciate it, Mark, very much. Delighted to be here. So one thing you didn't tell you folks, maybe I don't know where if it's the greater St. Louis area, but my roots, pardon the pun, that goes back to the Rittner School District. I know how to play the game in St. Louis. What high school you went to? So Rittner, Iveland, Page and Ashby, that neck of the woods. Anyhow, without further ado, so as Mark said, from the ground down, or Soils 101. This is kind of the 50,000, maybe the 20,000 foot level, but to give you some basic concepts, what we're going to do here as I go through. So hopefully at the end of the evening, you're going to be able to, there's no quiz, but we'll go through some of the basic soil science concepts that are kind of important, both in structure and function. I'm going to show you an online tool. Some folks might know about it already. It's really good if you live more in the exurban, less disturbed soil profiles around, South St. Louis, West St. Louis, and on out. We'll talk about collecting a soil sample and submitting it for an analysis and a brief interpretation of a couple test results that came back. But then more importantly, too, some few basic practices that you can do to help improve the health of your soil. This is actually, I'll put it one, I asked Mark a shameless plug. I've got actually two. The first one here, we do have a Healthy Yards for Clear Streams series right now going on. We're just now into week 2 through extension for the urban environment and soils. We just wrapped that up. So I've taken bits and pieces from that one and given it to you tonight. So first things first, soil is not dirt, okay? Soil has both a structure, as you see here, and a vertical profile. We'll talk about the different horizons, the different layers that you see there. And more importantly, it has an important function. Dirt is the stuff you get it on your hands and, under your boot. So because then it has really nothing except you want to get clean. We've got basically there's 4 basic functions of soil. So of course we can all imagine too that the first one there being support or anchorage. Some soils are going to provide better support than others. The swampy ground, the mucky soils, less firm than the soil profiles that we see, higher up. Aeration, that is a big one. Roots are living and growing, and they're going to need air to carry out critical physiological functions in order for them to grow. And we're going to talk more about that and the effects of soil compaction and what we can do to ameliorate that. Of course, water. How much moisture plants have at their disposal does have a dramatic effect on plant growth. Soil can serve as that bank for that rain or that irrigation water, with some soils retaining moisture better than others. And we'll talk about the different types of soils and what their water holding capacity is. Last but not least, nutrients. So both when the plant dies, it's broken down in the organic matter. The organic matter can then feed the new plants that grow. So really good plant growth begets more and better plant growth. And also too, the function of soil that we'll see, the nutrients, the salts, as that organic matter gets broken down, or you put inorganic fertilizer or organic fertilizer for that matter. But the nutrients are basically salts, and they are then dissolved in that soil water, and it's allowed for the tree roots to take it up. So the soil components, really look at it this way: about 45% is mineral matter, and mineral matter, those are those tan blobs that you see there in that schematic off to the right. So from large sand particles all the way down to clay particles, but about 45%. And then the other 50% there, depending upon the soil moisture, you can have 25% air, 25% water. Again, we need air in that space. You don't want it completely filled with water. And then last but certainly not least, that 5%, that organic matter, that is really critical. So if you look at that schematic over there on the right that you see, you've got macropores where the water can really flow. You've got then the mineral particles, and there's those adhesive factors of water clinging both to other water molecules and clinging to the sides of things. Um, and then that organic matter. So they kind of make the aggregates and make for the micropores, which is really where, again, those dissolved nutrients are in those micropores. You can think of those macropore spaces as the water flows through. That's what really does provide the air component. But organic matter, so we say that, or you'll see it in a lot of the soil tests, just OM. But so why is it important? Like we said, it's in addition to providing nutrients and actually habitat for the microflora and the microfauna. We really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to that until really recently. Soil health is becoming an increasingly more important discussion point. It's always been there. Soil scientists knew it, but the general public is understanding more. And the one thing it really does is that organic matter and it's stimulating the microflora and microfauna, or you can think worms and the worm castings. So the glue, as that material is actually what causes the aggregates, the dirt clods, okay, that you have. And you really want to see that texture. Those are kind of the macropores on steroids, if you will, in there. That really does allow for good permeability, infiltration of water into the soil from the top, and then also, through the profile itself. So again, just leading to this more graphic representation in some real world, that the organic matter and those macropores and those micropores, that all really does go hand in hand. So let's go back and look at the mineral component a little bit closer. We really have sand, silt, and clay. So if you can kind of think of the sand, in my crude representation, there is a beach ball. And so that's that material that's about 0.05 of a millimeter. It says up to 2 millimeters, but sand particles can be bigger than that. Actually, then you start getting more into the gravels. But then you've got the silt. That's the next class down. And think of those kind of like fat frisbees. And those will be from that 0.05 of a millimeter down to the 0.002 of a millimeter. And last but not least is the clay. And think of those kind of like a dime. They're smaller, they're thinner, and but those are the three components that really make up the mineral component. So the sand, what it does, it contributes to the overall soil porosity. The silt, it's what kind of gives the body to the soil. Silt is going to be the one that is really kind of, I shouldn't say the most important, but it's the one you'll see here in a second, the tie that binds things together. But it gives the body to the soil itself, to the profile. And then clay really contributes to the soil chemistry. Think back to when we were talking about, when I just mentioned the water molecules adhering to the surfaces of things. So the clay particles, you don't want to have a whole lot. We'll see that in a second. But those clay particles are what allow the water molecules with those dissolved nutrients to be available to the plant. Now, as we'll see here in a minute, like we say, we get too much clay in the soil, as we all know, and it dries out. The clay will actually hold that water tighter than the roots can pull them off. And so that does become a problem. But this is the basic three components. Now, if you look at it, you can put it into what they call the soil texture triangle. So before we'll look at the triangle itself. So on that left side, you see the percent clay going from 0 to 100%, the percent silt there on the right, going from the top 0 down to the bottom right, 100%, and then sand. Now, don't ask me when you go into any one point and go, Hank, if I read those lines right, then it's going to be 180%. I'm not a soil scientist. I didn't put this together. but it's universal. And you can see the way it breaks down is you've got something like that sandy clay loam. That's what you see that in that image on the left. And then we have that silty clay loam there on the right. The word that you have somewhere in there where you get those equal mixes or of that sand, silt, and clay, that's where we get the loam or the sandy loam or the clay loam. That's kind of that sweet spot where you like to see things. As we all know, we tend to have a lot of clay soils here, particularly in the urban environment, and we'll see why it's more clay than even our traditional soils that we have around the state. But the percent of the particle types really will determine what the water and nutrient holding capacity is. We'll talk a little bit more here. I was going to show this to you, and I'll give this, there's a link, and I'm going to give Mark a PDF file of this. And so, but if you just go out and Google soil texture by feel, that's a K-State, nice little 6-minute video where it talks about the ribbon test that you can do. You get to make a little clay ball or a soil ball, and then put it between your thumb and forefinger and actually see if that ribbon breaks apart as it's coming out from between your fingers, it's got a lot of sand in it. If you can make a ribbon that keeps on stretching, if you've done, think back to, what is it, 7th grade art class when you're doing the clay pottery. Yeah, that sort of thing. My sound system, of course, was a Gremlin, and it was kind of wonky tonight, sounded distant. So I wasn't going to put you through that, but this one really is, they did a good job with this one. There's other ones out there, and I'm not a K-State graduate. I bleed black and gold, but they did a really good job. So if you look at it, we're going to go through this table, the physical effects of what we say our soil texture. So the physical effects we look at, and I'm just going to kind of break them into the sand, loam, and clay. That loamy, that's that sweet spot between a predominantly sandy soil that we do have in the bottoms. You can have in those first and second benches up from a stream bank, most notably if it's a large stream, or in the Mississippi, Missouri waterways, the Salt River, Grand River up in North Missouri, where you can get some sandy soils. The clay, that's pretty much everywhere, and then that mix in between. But let's first look at infiltration. So there's 2 words there to kind of keep in mind. Infiltration, when we talk about that, that's the entry of the surface water into the soil. And so that's the first barrier for a raindrop or an irrigation drop to get through. In a sandy soil, predominantly those larger particles, it's very rapid. The water can penetrate or can get in really fast. Clay soils, not so much. It can be rapid if there's cracks, if it's recently, if it's been dried out, or very slow if there are no cracks. It's just, and then again, that loamy soil, that's that medium to slow, that's where we really want to be. Now, percolation, that's the internal, once this water gets into the soil profile, that's the internal water drainage and what we call the leaching, the carrying of those dissolved nutrients from the top where we put our fertilizers, the organic matter is, further down in the soil profile. And once again, sandy soils, that can happen very fast. That's why they tend to be very, very dry. So it can be very dry soils. I worked before coming back to Missouri. I worked for paper companies, timber companies in the Southeast. And so we had lots of sandy soils. I had lots of clay soil too. Clay soils, it can be fair to poor. Again, it usually tends to be more to that poor side because again, those water molecules will tend to hold onto those clay surfaces pretty tightly. And again, with the loam, where we kind of get that mix of those 3 texture classes in there, that's where we want to be. That's the good. It's allowing water to flow through and giving us those air spaces, but it's also holding back enough water to be available to the roots. And that kind of gets us right into what we said, water storage. So if it's moving through fast, those large sand particles, there's not a whole lot long-term storage. On clay soils, it can be, but then again, as that dries out, those clay particles are going to win out, holding on to the soil water, as opposed to the plant roots being able to take it up. And once again, medium right there in the loamy side. And hand in hand with water storage then is the aeration, or the movement of oxygen into the root zone and through the root zone. We'll mention that again. You know, our turf grasses, those roots only go down 2-3 inches tops. We want to get them down 3 inches. That's, in our watering, if we do our proper watering. Vegetable gardens and, our perennial flower beds and trees, those occupy anywhere from that 4 to about 10 inches. About 80% of our roots, even on tree roots, they're in that top 10 inches of soil. Now, some species, it'll get down to maybe, 12, and then you've got your anchor roots, your sinker roots that will go down further than that. But again, we want to see that moderate. We want to have water and we want to have air. So again, that's where that loam component comes in. Now, if we look at we said, the soil has a profile, it has layers. And so we'll kind of talk about, there's 4 of them that most folks know. The soil scientists, there's 2 others, and we'll mention briefly. But this is really for the homeowner, for the novice. This gets it as deep in the weeds as we need to be. So the O, that's the organic horizon. That's mostly organic matter, decomposing leaves. It'll be thin in some soils, thick in others, and you'll see not present at all in still others to it. But that's the one, depending upon what's going on in the plant growth above ground, that's what's leading into the O layer. Next on down, the A horizon, that's what we refer to, or most folks refer to as topsoil. So mostly minerals, it can be mostly minerals from the parent material coming up, being as the soil is generated, as it's called, and the organic matter from above being incorporated. That's where the good mix is. And that's the good material for plants and other organisms, the microflora, fungi, and the microorganisms, the bacteria, to be growing and living and thriving. The B horizon, so it's going to be rich in minerals that's leached down from the A horizon. That's where really right there between the A and the B, there's this one that you'll hear, or if you'll go out and Google, they'll call it the E horizon. That's the leach layer. That's what's coming, as water's moving down through that profile and it's picking everything up. The nutrients, those are, like I say, they're salts. So eventually the water plays out and it leaves those, those salts behind. And so you get that little leached layer. And again, depending upon the makeup of those mineral components, how thick or how prevalent that E layer is. Now in urban soils, that E layer doesn't hardly exist, because you'll see in a little bit, we've got drastically altered landscapes. The E horizon is more when we talk about prairie soils and undisturbed forest soils, where this profile has not been perturbed any. And that can be a really good indicator for the trained soil scientist to evaluate the long-term development of that profile, of that particular soil series, and its relative health. But then again, like we say, the B horizon, then it will pick up those leach materials that have been moved on down, and they'll tend to accumulate there. So again, with most of our roots being in that top 10 inches, they can get some of those nutrients that have been leached down, but they really then become unavailable for the vast majority of plants. And then last but not least, the C horizon, that's the parent material, the deposit at the Earth's surface, from which the soil develops. Sometimes too, then below that, they can have what they call the R horizon. It stands for rock or bedrock to it. Sometimes too, over the long haul, that we've had a lot of our soils. If you think back millennia when we had the glaciers, And then as they retreated, the silts and the loess soils that were developed, the residuum, the windblown soils that came in from the plains and the prairies and were deposited a lot of places in Missouri. If anybody's ever traveled up I-29, there, northwest corner of Missouri, those huge hills, those are loess deposits that will go down 30, 40, 50 feet, nothing but loess. But then the profile develops from that deposited residuum, as it's called. You can have the same kind of thing on a micro scale as silt comes down and settles in a bottom area. So local topography. So let's bring it a little bit closer to the backyard or your situation. Local topography can affect the soil profile. So if you look over there, um, our summits that maybe are poorly drained, in other words, they might have thin soils up there, but if you notice, you get off the shoulder, and that's where you lose even the A and the B horizon, and you'll see those rock outcroppings, the R horizon, the consolidated rock. Go in the Ozarks, and you'll see those rock ledges, if you will, in our Ozark hills. And then as that soil has been eroded and transported down by rain, it then starts picking up again in the bottoms where you get that nice thick A horizon, water saturated B horizon, as opposed to say on the weld and that profile there on the left. So those are more like our Ozark summits. It could be our summits anywhere, excuse me, and our south and west facing slopes, hill slopes. That's what we tend to see. If we have our east and our north facing slopes, they tend to be wetter, cooler, moister, supporting better plant growth. And so there you'll tend to have you might have a thin A horizon, but the profile will tend to be thicker and maintained even on those side shoulder slopes all the way down into once we get into bottom again. And then you get the residuum coming down from being eroded from the summits and the hillsides. Got to settle somewhere. So, gravity wins out, and that's where it's at. Soil color. So color can say a lot about a soil, but it can also be misleading. People will tend to think as black soil is good dirt, but not always. Color itself, it'll have little effect on plant growth, but it is a good indicator of soil properties that do affect plant growth. And so it is an indicator, usually tend to be associated with organic matter. So black will tend to be that, you've seen it, the topsoil, it'll be rich in organic matter. The gray will usually be an indicator of poor drainage, poor aeration. If anybody's ever picked up a mucky soil, you've got that rotten egg or kind of sewage kind of smell to it. That is a result of the anaerobic respiration going on, the breakdown of all the biological material, giving that foul odor. Reds and yellows, those tend to be associated with older and more weathered. So our clays and our soils, as they become oxidized, as the soil matures and goes on, that leaching of nutrients as air gets in, particularly in our sandy soils, sandy clay soils down in the Piedmont, where again I worked in the southeast. Think the Alabama, Georgia clays, that sort. We even get those kind of soils, in our Ozark profiles. So again, they've got in this one here, you can see the water at the bottom, and there is, again, you'll get capillary or upward movement of water up to a point where it doesn't go any further because of gravity. But you can see that's that gray soil that you'll see, and roots really don't want to grow there because again, that's saturated with water and not enough air. Now that soil profile's got other issues kind of going on with it. You can see it's got quite what we call a rock layer or fragipan underneath there. Sometimes that can be caused by repeated tilling in an ag field and settling those rocks down, usually about 10, 12 inches of hard pan. But we have those natural hard pans that happen in our Ozark Hills, those frangipans. That leads to another reason why a lot of our trees in the Ozarks, you get on the summits, you wonder if we're trying to grow bonsai trees or not. No, they're just hitting that, they're hitting that rock layer. The only thing that kind of saves us in some of those situations is, again, that less soil that's been deposited as kind of a cap on top of the hill. Gumbo, it's black. It's got a lot of high, it's high in organic matter, but it's also a lot of clay. I drive out to our farm in New Franklin from Columbia, great gumbo bottoms, but boy, when they till that in the spring, if it's been, they do that because if they don't, they've got to break up that gumbo soil. It just is really, it's not good for gardening if you happen to have it. But again, this is mainly in our agricultural fields. But so black can be misleading, particularly if it tends to have a lot of clay to it. All right, let's get out of the dirt a little bit, the soil, pardon me. I did it for myself. Let's talk soil water. So again, infiltration and percolation, you'll want to keep in mind that we say infiltration is the water entering the soil surface, and then percolation is the movement of water within that soil profile. So we're going to spend, I got 2 graphics here. We're going to kind of step through. This kind of gets to basic plant growth and development. So what we've got here from left to right, we've got a super saturated soil, and then we've got one that is very dry. And so we'll go left to right. So when you have water that is filling up all the air spaces, and think of that at the bottom there, if we could cut off that soil profile, we'd actually, 20 inches down, you'd see water coming out. And so the plant is too wilted because there's too much water. Water's being wasted here in that case. But it's wilted because, again, roots need air. And if they don't have air to grow, then they die. And I think Mark kind of alluded to that when you talk health issues. A lot of the things that we're seeing as a result of our trees dying now is a result of, we've had some really wet years going back to the Easter freeze of 2007. And so what happened is roots turn over very fast. And when there's a lot of water, they lay up top. And then when it dries out, if we have a flash drought like we did in 2012, they can't sustain themselves. But in the meantime, what that's doing is it's setting up for phytophthora, and which is a class of pathogens that love water situations. So that's a big one in there that I'm sure will be talked about later on, but keep on going over. So then here, it's a healthy plant. We still have water wasted. It's not really showing up any kind of air spaces there, but the plant's able to hold its own. We're just below a magical point called field capacity. And field capacity is that point really between where we're at in this slide and here, where we have healthy plant and no water is wasted. Now you can see some white spaces in there representing air. And so that point from where you just start getting gravitational water moving out of the soil profile, that's that field capacity. The soil structure, those 3 particle sizes, they can't hold anything more. And so not even the clay particles, and the water is free to flow through if it could. And so from this point over, this is where the plant available water is. If we can maintain the water in this range, is for optimal plant growth. But then, of course, as we start drying out the soil, then we get again, more air, less water. And you can see now the blue representing the water is now tightly held around the soil particles. If you've got the smaller those soil particles, then to those clay, then they hold that water tighter than the plant can pull. And then that's when we get the permanent wilting point. That's when we start seeing the plant wilt. And if it stays past that permanent wilting point, depending upon the plant for how long, that will lead to plant death. So saturation, field capacity, and wilting point. I'm sure Mark will have a quiz for you next week. So let's look at it another way, how that texture affects that water availability. Again, we'll stay on this slide and kind of walk through it. We have the sand, if it's predominantly sand, and then we've got our dense clay, and then we've got kind of that sweet spot, that lower layer. But if we look at if it's mainly sand, you can see going from 0 water to saturation, we've got a lot of gravitational water. It can move through the soil very fast if it's, say, a pure sandy soil. Don't have a whole lot of unavailable water because it's moving through. But at the top end, because again, it's just, there's nothing there to kind of hold it back and make unavailable. But between that wilting point and that field capacity, that window for available plant water is pretty narrow. It shifts when we get down to, and we have more clay or a dense clay, we can tend to have more available plant water, but it's, you've really got to have almost a saturation point to beyond field capacity, because again, that clay is going to tend to hold on to the water. So then we tend to have, as that soil starts to dry out and kind of go back to the left, that water is unavailable because the clay is going to win out every time. And then you have where we have that nice mix of a sand, silt, and a clay, where we get our different sandy loams or clay loams. That loam, that silt component, that's what kind of gives the, if you will, the loam adjective to the soil. See how now much wider that window is for plant available water. And that's really where we want to be. So that's a nice, I like that graphic there. I kind of just talked through it in one slide. I tend to do that. And so what we have there. Now we're going to wrap up some things, just a little bit talking about soil fertility. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK, that is the big three, but we've got other elements that are out there, and we're going to mention those. Sandy soils are the most problematic because, again, you don't have a lot of available water kind of hanging back. And so we could really run into issues there. So you really have to watch fertility. Fertility on those sandier soils is a little bit trickier. You have to do a lot of spoon feeding of the fertilizers. But more importantly here, but like I say, there's other minerals that are used in moderate quantities. So we got our top 3 up there. The next one's down, being sulfur and calcium and magnesium and even iron. But then you see down below, we've even got some of, we start moving from our macronutrients, which are really those top 4 or top 5. And then we've got micronutrients that they're required by the plant, but in smaller amounts, but the big 3 are there. And then we've got this thing called pH. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot, but knowing the fact on our soil tests, pH is a driving factor of what we see of, nutrient availability. And probably the most notorious one here to kind of point out is, let me back up. I'll kind of go there. There's the sweet spot. So 7 is neutral. 6, we're getting slightly acid. Just for you folks, if you got any soft drinkers out there, carbonated beverages, the pH of a can of Coke or can of Pepsi is about 4. So just for grins on that, but that's the sweet spot we want to be in. So let's look at iron though for a second, because that's the one, if we look at pin oaks, our notorious canary in the coal mine as far as iron and nutrient availability, or a good indication of pH. When the pH gets above 7, or actually it starts getting 6.5, that's when we start seeing the pin oaks turn off yellow. You'll see it in other red oaks, but pin oak tends to be notorious for that. Notorious for a lot of other things, but and that's why we have to go out and either drop the pH or put out a chelated product that we'll talk about a little bit down the road here. So we can do 2 things. We can use lime to raise the pH. Lime will also can add calcium to the situation. If it's high, and particularly if we've got an acid loving plant like a pine, or a spruce, then we could add sulfur. And sometimes it can be a straight sulfur. Sometimes it can, again, we can kind of shoot a double here and do something like ammonium sulfate, where we got ammonium giving some nitrogen to the soil, as plants really use a lot of nitrogen to things. But we can also then at the same time lower the pH. Almost to the break here, folks. Something we'll mention down the road when we talk about soil test, CEC, or cation exchange capacity. So why is that important? Well, that goes into, it's the measure of the soil's ability to hold positively charged ions. And most of our nutrients are those positively charged particles. So it's very important in influencing soil structure and stability, nutrient availability. So if you stop and think to those clay particles, the organic matter, being able to, those combinations, particularly that organic matter, that's what helps raise the CEC. And so you really want to have that ability for those nutrients to kind of hang back around, but yet not hang back around so tight that the plant roots can't take them up. And so that's why, that's important. Compacted soil. So we're going to go two ways on this one. So compacted soil, folks don't realize this, but 70 to 80% of soil compaction happens on the first pass. The other, you'll get another 10 to 15% compaction on the second pass. So when I worked with landowners out in the forest, woodlands, and they want to do a timber harvest, I've had landowners occasionally, they didn't understand. They didn't want to see a main skid trail again and again and again. They wanted to see the equipment move out and about. And so, no, there's a reason why skid trails properly placed are there, because we know we're going to disturb the soil, and in some places more so than others. So let's concentrate that. And then we can also plan our harvesting trails to serve as fire breaks, to serve as recreational trails down the road. So, but you can see what happens is that compacted soil, we're really impacting that airspace. And again, air is just as important as available water. We do compact it again, so we lose our water holding capacity, but nothing near as much as we do on the soil air. And if you look proportionally, we really kind of compress that organic matter. So it's really kind of important. Now you go, well, how much can a vehicle impact? So here's an example here that the gross weight of an average small pickup truck is somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 pounds. So even at that 5 tons or less, we're compacting the soil down about beyond 12 inches. And if we look at heavy duty pickups, and even worse, I had, again, when I lived in Florida, we'd have our septic tank pumped out, and I waited. We had a wet spring, and I kept on putting them off, putting my family off. We had to deal with that, but finally dried out. I thought enough, and those trucks, after he got done, I had about a 10-inch depression. It wasn't really a rut, if you will, but it was just that he just came in, parked, and moved out, and we were down a good 20 inches. So we really compacted the soil immensely. And again, keep in mind, we said most of our plant roots, where are they at? They're in the upper 12%. So one thing you can do, and it's done when you do it, if you have septic fields, it's called the perk test, that percolation test, going back to, again, soil moving, the water moving through the soil. So here's a little one that you can do for yourself that I'll have homeowners do on the first day. So you're going to dig a hole, and you're going to dig a hole about 12 inches in diameter and 12 inches deep. Try to make it straight sides. If you're testing your entire property, you've got to dig several of these holes. You just don't want to take one sample, because drainage can vary. And then you're going to fill it with water. Okay. And that's all you're going to do first day. Walk away, because you want to let it sit overnight. This is going to saturate the soil, excuse me, and give you a more accurate test reading the second day. So on that second day, then what you're going to do is you're going to refill the hole with water. Hopefully it's an empty hole. If it's not, that already tells you which way you're going to go. But you fill the hole all the way, or up to the top, or at some point. And then you see I've got some kind of a straight edge here. It's a piece of bamboo. And you measure that distance, measure that water level. And then you're going to come in and you're going to measure that drainage every hour. You could probably measure it, if you're lazy, you could measure it every 2 hours. Some tests say wait and just time how long it takes for it to drop. But I like doing it every hour because it's going to give you that rate. And that's important, because here's some drainage rates rules of thumbs that you can use. So if it's more than 4 inches per hour, you got a lot of sand, it's too fast. If it's, oops, sorry, I went backwards on you there. Didn't mean to do that. Little operator area. If it's about that 1 to 3 inches per hour, generally it's okay for garden plants and trees that have average drainage needs. Again, you're going to be wanting, if it's in that 2 inches per hour, that's ideal. And if it's less than 1 inch per hour, you got more clay and it's going to be too slow. So you're going to need to improve the drainage, or choose plants that are going to tolerate that wet soil. So that's compaction, that's percolation. Now we'll close out this with backfilling. Backfilling is harmful too. How many times have you seen this? This is equivalent to that. Okay. You start putting 2 inches, 3 inches, 5 inches, a foot of soil because you want to do the grade differently. You don't want to do that. Or if you'll see that little well they'll put around a tree, again, the root system of a tree goes out, usually at least as tall as the tree is high. It'll go out as far as the tree is high, but it'll actually go out further than that. So that's where, again, you'll want to see, that's what you want to see, what tree trunks should look like. Again, when you got the root flare and you've got, then you've got your feeder roots and those secondary roots close to the soil surface. But oftentimes when we don't, and you backfill, you get into this, and I'm sure Mark will probably talk about this. Sorry, Mark, I won't steal any more thunder. Stem girdling roots. So where, again, you're just creating that ideal environment for roots to not only try to occupy that space, but then they're going to do those kind of strange, funky things. And with that, let's take a break. A little bit of history about that. So that's our first run of this year's maple. We do some maple syrup production on the basket area in Ashland. And that was 2 runs in the first day. That first one there is on the right. And the second one was our second day run. And we were talking to other maplers here in mid-Missouri, at least, and they all saw the same thing. We've never seen that light of a first run before. So Mark, I'll shut up now. I'll leave that break up, or no, I won't. I'll stop sharing so you can see it and we can kind of come back.
All right, so we only have a couple questions here. One, which I answered according to what Wikipedia could tell me, but so Gumbo Flats in Chesterfield, is that named for the soil?
It is. It's a gum. Yeah, it's just gumbo can be a catch-all for those heavy clay bottomland soils that we tend to get.
So Wikipedia does sometimes have accurate information.
There you go.
Yeah. And so we have another one here, and I think what they're getting at is a lot of the what I would call like total tree failures we've had, especially in the last couple of years, where a tree falls over at the root, that kind of becomes uprooted. And they're asking if that is from too much water.
It depends upon the size. You probably know as well as I do in your experiences that a lot of that has come as a result of those stem girdling roots. But the other cases where yeah, we've had too much. It could be, again, depending upon this, I can say a good extension answer, it depends. But really it is where we've had, if you stop and you think, too wet of soils, and not only the tree roots, that those fine roots, they turn over about every 18 to 24 months. The tree is constantly regenerating itself that way. And so when you don't have that ability, and those roots tend to then degrade from both Phytophthora, and I'm blanking on my other one that's out there, Armillaria. That's the one that really has nailed us. Armillaria, that's the one. It's ubiquitous out in the soil profile, and what it does is it just kind of lays back. When a tree is stressed, then it does a weird, neat thing. It mummifies. It literally runs up the outside of the root, and then it eats from the outside in, and so it degrades that. So then, yeah, you can get these root failures just from that, and a tree will just finally go over.
Yeah, Armillaria was insane last September. I was seeing it everywhere. And I mean, I know it was there before, but I was seeing the
We're seeing
fruiting bodies, which I
we're
guess on
seeing
the
a
upside
lot.
they are edible. So
I don't know. Well,
honey
the only thing,
mushroom.
only thing I know about mushrooms is anybody can eat a mushroom once.
True. If you're not very confident, just don't bother. But yeah, I certainly in the last few years, I remember in 2015 when I was working in Forest Park, we had a few trees that were perfectly healthy, but we had that period where it was just the ground was so saturated for like a month straight. And then when you combine that with high winds, even sometimes, a healthy tree, just because the soil is so saturated, the roots just don't really have anything to grip onto.
It can be, and it doesn't take wind. It's really been weird. The last couple of
Mm.
weeks, I've had two or three landowners. One started out, if a tree falls in the woods, does anybody hear it? And he said it was a perfectly sunny, windless day, and it just keeled over. I remember playing in our neighbor's yard. We had huge black oak trees in that part of Overland. I mean, and it was a perfectly calm day, and we were playing next to one, and we just happened to get up, and the tree next to it, about 100 feet over, fell over, and it would have nailed us for sure, but it just gave up the ghost. And a lot of that has to do with the age of the trees. Our red oaks and our black oaks, notorious. People think oaks live a long time. Well, the white oaks do, but those guys in particular, pin oaks, they live about 70, 90 years, 70 if they start becoming compromised for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it seems like there are a lot of pin oaks planted kind of like right after World War II into the 50s they're just kind of hitting the end of the road now.
Yep, we've got that on for any Mizzou grads out there. I'm working with the botanical garden up here because we're having to replace all of the pin oaks on the quad. We
Mm.
lost significant numbers. We're actually growing white oaks now, a variety of white oaks now out at one of our farms, and we'll probably be doing a complete replacement in about 2 years.
All right, we have one other question that just
Sure.
came in a minute ago. So I have a straight willow tree that is 4 years old, and it sends up at least 30 suckers from the ground around the trunk and as far away as 10 feet. What am I doing wrong?
Not doing anything wrong. That's willow. You know that. I mean, no, willow, cottonwood. I mean, willow in particular, it suckers like that.
uh,
It will just throw those up. Now, if you're getting those stem suckers and whatnot, that can be saying the tree is stressed. Uh, Usually, though, I mean, I haven't seen. I mean, willow will throw them up 10 feet, for out from a tree. Um, I don't know what the health of that tree looks like, but it could be something going on. But willows are notorious for doing that.
yeah, if it's only 4 years old, it's you would assume it's probably fairly healthy. But yeah, I mean it is.
Fairly
It's
healthy, fairly vigorous, fairly juvenile,
uh
and those are all characteristics for throwing root suckers up.
yeah. Luckily, it's pretty softwood, so you can probably just mow those things down. Okay, and we have one more here. American holly doesn't seem to do well in St. Louis clay. Any
Nope.
suggestions?
Nope. I tell you what, I don't know if anybody, look up Cress Farm in Jefferson County. It's north of it's right off of, what is that, 21 north of Hillsboro. And I've been visiting folks out there. Anyway, the caretaker out there has got some of the largest collection of hollies anywhere in the Eastern United States. And so he would be the one. Yeah. Holly, Ilex Apaca, the only place that's native in Missouri is Crowley's Ridge, which is that ridge there east of Poplar Bluff. You got the flatlands area there, but then you got this ridge, and the soils there, they tend to be a little bit, loamy, sandy, and get out of the clay. But no, holly will not tolerate a clay soil.
I will say, if anyone is ever by the Muni in Forest Park, just to the west of the Muni, by the lower Muni parking lot, there's a group of American hollies that are really amazing. I mean, they're the biggest ones I've ever seen in St. Louis, but they haven't been limbed up. So the branches are laying on the ground and they've rooted into the ground and they're
Yeah.
sending up like little shoots. Very cool. But yeah, typically you see, maybe 20 feet, they just don't really get that big, but these are, they're just the only hollies I've ever seen that I was like really impressed by in St.
I'm
Louis. So
I'm surprised. We've got a number of fairly large hollies around campus. Like you said, I teach dendro, so it's fun to have those. That's the easy quiz tree. If a student can't get a holly tree, I think they need to find another profession.
absolutely. Well, yeah, that does it for the questions. If you're ready
Yeah,
to get back into it,
yeah,
let's
we
go
can
ahead.
get back in. What we'll do now is we'll kind of move into. I'm going to show you an online tool, and then we'll talk a little bit about soil sampling and testing as it goes. So let's go back here to it. All right. So online soil information. Now, I'll give a spoil. I'll go ahead and tell you where this is going. Urban soils are going to be kind of like, don't read this script very well, but there is a neat tool out there. If you just Google the Web Soil Survey, and you'll get this page, and you can find it. And so it's done by the USGS NRCS folks, or actually NRCS folks, Natural Resource Conservation Service. And this is a neat tool. Rural landowners, I mean, our forest and woodland owners, I point that to them all the time. You even get the app on your phone. I was hoping what I'll do, Mark, is I'll send that, John Cabrick with the Forest Service up here. He was going to send me a little video clip that he did for the professionals. And I thought, John, I want that. He just hasn't had time. But I'm going to take you through this, and I'm going to do it in a series of slides versus doing it live, because you know what happens when you try to do something live, it breaks down. But you just hit the easy green button. That's what, it's so easy. So when you hit that, this is what will come up. You get a map. And if anybody's played with geographical information systems, there's a series of buttons up there that you can zoom in on and kind of get in. And you can kind of hunt and peck that way. Or the easier way is you can just look on that address, and those little chevrons, those little double down arrows, you click on that, and you can type in, and all I did was type in my home address where I grew up, 1812 Seal, and it zooms in, it goes right to it. Now, I had to highlight the little dot there, and I kind of purposely moved it down. It'll normally appear right in the center, but then it will give you, it'll zero in. Now, then what you can do, you have to do, so you go, that's great, I want to get information. But before you can get information about your soil, then you have to do something else. You have to do these two little buttons up here, and they're called, I know they're small, it's called AOI, for area of interest. And one is a rectangle, and one of them is a weird shaped figure for a polygon. So you could actually go in and, if you zoomed in closer, like I say, it's mainly used this for woodland owners, but I've seen it done in urban areas too. And I just clicked on a box. I just went out and made a rectangle. And when I did that, it generates this crosshatch area. And so now I can go into this area and probe and ask questions of different things. Now, the reason I made this one so large is because I'm only going to show you a couple of features. And when you get in there, you can poke around and they've got little information buttons that if you don't know what something is, you can, hey, what is it? And you can go that way. But I pulled out this for a reason. And that reason being, so then I clicked on, so this one here, if you look back, these tabs along the top, there was the area of interest. Then I clicked over here on the one they call the soil map, and then it generates a map. Now I know this one's hard to see out here, but it'll actually generate a map, and there's a 5-digit code that will, all the soils within my area of interest, it will pull up and tell me how many acres and what percent of my area is that particular soil type. Now, the reason I did this is because look over here in this column and you see the map unit name and you see urban land / harvester. And then we have a Winfield silt loam from the infamous Winfield, Missouri. There's a Winfield silt loam. Then there's a Menfro / urban land complex. Menfro is our state soil, by the way. If you ever in a Trivial Pursuit, and that one would come up, the state soil of Missouri is Menfro. And then you've got this one I highlighted here, this urban land harvester complex. That happens to be down where my home is. And the reason I bring that up is because of this. I'm going to pull that up. There it is there. And it doesn't say a whole lot because it can give me, go out there and say, oh, for the top 0 to 7 inches, I've got a silt loam. And then I've got a silty clay loam. And then I go down below 30 inches and it's that clay loam as opposed to a loamy clay. I mean, I've got more clay there than I do kind of a loam to it. But we're only talking the top soil anyway that we want, and I can do that infamous KSU ribbon test and it'd be just fine. The other thing that this you can pull out when you look, and these descriptions are below this table. So this page that I'm showing you, you actually scroll down and you can see all this. The only other thing is this available water holding capacity. It says in the top 20 inches, I've got about 8.5 inches of available water. So it's what they call moderate. The lower that number, usually the sandier the soil or the less water holding capacity there is for the plant. And the reason I kind of bring this up is one thing is, what is the St. Louis area? It is, notice it says urban land, and then it's got the name of a soil series, harvester, or in this case, complex. And urban land is vastly disturbed. So that's why you don't see just a straight soil profile. Now, if you get out in some areas that's still wooded, I imagine, I don't know what, it'd be interesting. I didn't look at Forest Park to see what it was since it was vastly disturbed in 1904. You know, what that would look like, but more of the ex-urban areas, or you have a large piece of property. Yeah, you might, and you got woods. You think back to that schematic of that soil profile, that the topography thing, you might see something. But that's one thing. I'm going to show you another one. So I zoom back out, and now I looked into this other map, what I call the Soil Data Explorer, and you can see for all these different things, you had soil chemical properties. The problem is, if I zoomed in on just my little area, there's nothing there. And the reason there's nothing there is because of this urban land complex. I pulled this far out and I'm just looking now, it says organic matter. And if I pull up the table there, now you can see any place where I have it says urban leading off, and I come over here to the rating as far as what the percent organic matter should be, there's nothing. And the reason why is, there you go, urban land, that's my one in my home, where the circle is, there's nothing there. Because of this one simple fact. That's what we're dealing with in the urban areas, in the ex-urban areas. Now you still might have, if, like I say, if you're in the urban wildland interface, the soil map might still show a soil series, but if you've got conditions like this, usually what happens is you've seen it in developments. People think I live in the forest. I don't. My other half wanted to live, and so we live in a tract home and in a subdivision that was being built around 2000. And what they do is huge mounds of dirt. Well, that's the topsoil. And then they grade it and they put the utilities in and the streets and the basements or whatever, walkouts. And then they put in enough topsoil to grow to which to lay the sod. But anything below that, that's what we have. So that was a quick run through of the web soil survey. You can email me if you ever have questions, you get in there, but it's pretty intuitive. And if you kind of know what you're wanting to look for, you can find the information there. It's kind of scary what all you can kind of get in, what you can find out there. But that's one tool. That's a really powerful tool. And like I say, there's even the California Soil Service and the Forest Service here, our research unit, our soil scientists worked, and they developed and was able to take this and put it in an app. So, and if you've got your GIS on in your smartphone, you can get the information, I mean, literally right below your feet. So it's really powerful for woodland owners or for folks that have large tracts of land. So we're going to look at soil testing and a few things there, and we can take another little break. So what we've got here going on. So sampling is going to be the key on all this. If you sample, and again, I'm going to show you, reference a video clip here but we're not going to show it, but it's one that's out there. When we sample for turf, we only have to go down about 3 inches. For gardens, vegetable gardens, trees, pollinator gardens, flower beds, you want to go down a full 6 inches, and lo and behold, most of our garden spades, that trowel is 6 inches deep. So we can go through, and what you do on that is you will actually go in. This shows kind of a pretty traumatic way to do it, but you actually kind of go in and you put the spade in the ground, the trowel in the ground, and you come back, pull it out, you move it back about an inch, and you make a parallel, and you pull out that slice. And then you don't need that much. You take of that, you don't need that whole spade. You kind of shave off the edges of it. So you've got like maybe a 1 inch plus strip going down the center of that trowel. And that's the piece you put in the bag. Whoops, I did it again, went backwards. But this is what it looks like, so in your areas. Now, this is for lawn testing if you've got something, but if you wanted to sample around a tree, you would want to take easily, definitely within the drip line, but you could go out from that. If it's, like I say, usually go out. Rule of thumb I'll use is twice the height of the tree. That's kind of the effective root zone, because you've got a lot of feeder roots going out. If a tree's anywhere near established, like a 6+ year old tree or something of that nature. And you'll want to take about 8 or 10 samples and place in a plastic bag. So here's a better graphic of that, what we're talking about. So you put the trowel in, you put it in again. They show a wedge here. I mean, kind of like going opposite sides. I actually will just place it right behind the first slit and pull that slice out. And then kind of, as it shows there where the arrow is here, shave off the sides and put it in a clean bucket, and then go out and do that, about 8 times. You'll want to have at least a cup of soil. Most of the extension, the St. Charles and the St. Louis County, they'll say 2 just in case, they spill something in the lab or whatever. I mean, they can usually get by with a cup of soil, but in that range there. And I'll show you here in a sec. This is the website where you can kind of go out. If you just Google if you go extension.missouri.edu, soil analysis, you'll get to this page. And that's an excellent video that's out there that horticulturalist Nathan Brandt, he's no longer with Extension here. You got Justin Key now in the area, really good guy. But there's a real nice video on collecting the soil samples. And it'll also go through and tell you how to ship it and everything of that nature. It actually, though, again, so there's the video, you just click on it, it will go through. Like I say, I'm going to spare you my muffled sound here. This one here, so this one I mentioned, so I'm working with, we got this Healthy Yards Clear Streams program going on right now. We got about 40 folks in there all over the state. And this guy happened to be, bless his heart, he happens to be down in Taney County, the rock capital, rock soil. It's a Clarksville series soil. And you can see, you can't give rocks to the soil. We don't analyze rocks, but you have to kind of pull out those pieces. That's where we say, again, when he had this kind of soil, I said, we'll start out with, get him down. You're not going to get it all out, and the grinders will process some of it, but you got to get out the big chunks. And he had that, what is that, 1/2-inch screen? I said, no, try to pull out the big chunks and get it in through maybe a 1/4-inch screen. That's why he had more that he had there. He had more clay too. So he had, in this case, you have to kind of break it in. So this was a more problematic soil, but that is, we'll talk about what a soil test won't tell you. And that's one of the things, as far as it won't give you a mineral analysis on the rocks. Okay. So this is a sample submission form that the MU Soil Testing Lab, and I'm not condoning or whatever, MU Soil Lab, they do have a very effective one, but there are other private labs out there, and they all are about the same in cost, and they'll all look the same that you'll have. And you'll see in the middle here, you can do whether lawns, you can do trees, perennial bedding, there's trees, and you can specify the tree. So what it is, you'll have whatever sample that you identify. So in this case here, again, I pulled this from our Healthy Yards. So front yard. And then I went through here. So I might have, if I wanted to, I could do a specific plant. I could say I wanted to do a fescue mix, an average yard, and say I wanted to also get a recommendation on trees. So I would put in the one column, one box there, I'd put, fescue, and I'd put the appropriate code from up there in that gray shaded area, and I'd put trees, and they also got fruit trees or nut trees, making sure I sampled within the root zone of that. And personally, I probably would separate them out as a unique sample, rather than asking them to give me a recommendation on both, unless I'm really lazy and I'm going to fertilize or do any kind of soil amendments, broadcast that way on it. And then I'll go over here, usually of the regular soil test. Now there are other ones that are out there that the extension agent, or if you have a particular thing, if you got yellowing pin oaks, you maybe could check the iron one and see if, tested for iron levels. If you really wanted to, you could do a far over to the far right. It says soil texture. So they actually dissolve the soil that you have, some of it, and they'll put it in a column of water, and how long it takes the sand to settle out, the silt to settle out, and last but not least, the clay to settle out. And it'll give you a more, than just the quick and dirty thumb feel, if you will. So there, like I say, so fescue, I'll put in the code, and then I'll check the box for regular. Now, like I say, you can send your soil, you can do it yourself. You send it directly to the soil testing lab here in Columbia. The lab right now, they're still, because it only takes checks, no credit cards or cash, you actually put In the lab fee, it's $12.50 for a sample. So for each sample that you want done. So you put the soil sample in and the check and the completed soil sample information form, and you ship it up here to Columbia, or if you're in mid-Missouri or passing through Columbia, you can drop it off in the basement of Mumford Hall. I personally, and then, of course, you pay for the shipping on that. I personally, and last but not least, I, I have a I have a retired postal worker in our healthy yards, and I said, you might want to ship UPS. And he chimed in and goes, yeah, that's for sure. But we also recommend, you've got a really good, both Jefferson County and St. Louis County and St. Charles and the surrounding counties, is you could take it directly to your extension office. And I say that they can assist in filling out that soil sample information form. They also will have appropriate shipping materials, and then they ship UPS. They will ship, they usually ship, I think, on the end of the week, Fridays. They collect them, and then the lab gets them usually on Monday. They're up here. It is more expensive. It averages, I really don't know what it is for St. Louis County. I think Jefferson County, it's 20. It varies just a little bit, and you go, well, why is it costing, and that's comparable to its soil testing labs. They might be like 15 plus the shipping that you do. But the thing that I say is, it gives you the hassle of, if you take it in there, the office can check with you and make sure you've got all your I's dotted and T's crossed. The worst thing you can do is not fill out a form completely, and then the soil lab is trying to contact you, and you're back and forth. And if you don't do that form every day, you might go, oh yeah, they call you, you're wherever, and you don't have that form in front of you. It just saves the hassle to have the extension office help you there. So that is one shameless plug I will give. So here you go. We're going to interpret a couple of soil tests. This is one. This was so they did one sample. They wanted to know fruit trees. They were also doing some strawberries, blackberries, and gooseberry, and they were doing vegetables. So it probably sounds like this one was a vegetable garden, had some sunlight and whatnot, maybe had those, your smaller stuff around the perimeter, and your fruit trees not shading. So then you can look at, we're going to just kind of pull this apart. First thing we look at is pH. pH, yeah, we say between 6 and 7, or 5.5, 6.5. So that's pretty good. That looks really good. You will see too, these bars over here. I think I've got that next. Yeah. So then the next thing here is you got your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. We'll talk a minute about nitrogen, why that isn't in there. But you'll see these numbers here. That's the soil analysis. That tells us how many pounds of that element are per acre, on a per acre basis, in the soil. So that's the lab, is to use that numbers to get at recommendations. But then they try to put it graphically, and that's what we do over here with the rating. So you can imagine, if something is very low, the odds of it responding to putting in external fertilizer, probably pretty good. If you're high, very high, or excess, why put down fertilizer? And I know people do it all the time. They don't test, and and they end up, that's where we get in our problems with our poor string quality. A little is good, so a lot's better. Or soil test, I put out 10, 10, 10 every year. And I'll be honest, I did that early on, thinking that we had that altered landscape and that it's nutrient poor. And as a result, when I finally did a test, my phosphorus and potassium were off the charts. And what was I doing? I was putting out 10, 10, 10. So one, I was buying stuff that I didn't need. And two, I was putting it on in the soil that was being potentially carried away, either down through the soil profile, or in a heavy rain off to the side. So not very smart on my part. I'll throw myself under the bus there. Organic matter, pretty good. 3.8. Usually on those altered landscapes, it can be 1%. Wouldn't or less. 5% is pretty much the top of the game, but you can have it above that, particularly if you've been doing some of the things we'll talk about here in a bit. Usually that range of 2 to 3%. This one, though, is, pretty darn good. The other thing we look at is that cation exchange capacity. And again, not expecting to make soil chemists out of you all, but the range that you'd like to see that number in is about an 8 to 18. You can go higher. 30 is pretty darn high. When you start getting that high, that's when you start running into maybe some salt issues, if you will. But sandy soils, man, when I lived in the South on our one home, our CEC was like 7. It was sandy soils. That's where we said, again, they becomes very problematic. Or if you're doing a manufacture, if you're doing a raised bed and you put a lot of sand in it for your vegetable garden or whatever, you got to, again, and you didn't do a very good job of constructing your artificial soil, you can run into issues there where your CEC can be low. Usually not the case, but I've seen it. And then here, wow, nothing. Well, why is that? Because it's really good. If you look back up here and here, they don't need anything. And they base these recommendations upon what they find out in the soil analysis. And so this is kind of good, particularly if you do, we don't say you don't have to do a soil test every year. We say every other year, maybe 3 years tops between times. But then you can kind of see trends. So these bars, you can't go by these little asterisks. Some soil tests, soil labs, these will be nice color graphs. They might be horizontal like this. They might be vertical bar graphs. Everyone's a little bit different. So this one here, I mean, yeah, no complaints whatsoever. Now let's look at this one. So here, right off the bat, phosphorus. Phosphorus tends to be a very immobile nutrient in the soil. So when I see something very low like this, in an urban environment, I'm kind of, the flags going up. Is this an altered landscape where they've stripped off that A horizon and they've put it back or put back very little? And then, so there again, that phosphorus is bound up in that top layers. And so it's not there. So that's one thing I don't like about this particular analysis. And everything else, okay, yeah, things are low to medium, and you can see that's being reflected down here in the phosphorus that you have. We'll come back to nitrogen here in a sec. Organic matter, 1.9, not too bad. Again, at 2 to 3 range, but when I start seeing it get down below 2, I start going, is there something else going on that I'm not aware of? Cation exchange capacities is good. So yeah, I'd give that kind of didn't put a red square around it. pH 4.9. Yeah, that's getting down there. So that is why you see this down here, a lime suggestion. And all these suggestions on these nutrient requirements, regardless of the lab, they're going to be based on 1,000 square foot basis. So one thing I really didn't talk about here is if you don't know your square footage, you need to know that. Not knowing the square footage is about as bad as me putting down 10, 10, 10 year after year. So, and now they've got, in our healthy yards, we show folks how to use, there's some Google tools that you can use and actually determine the area of your, put the little marks around the perimeters of your yard and get your square footage. So that's kind of a nice little thing to do. So again, so it's saying here, besides the lime, to raise the pH, we're saying we don't need potassium. Potassium, they're saying, it's medium, it's okay, but we want to have some phosphate put out and we want some nitrogen. We'll talk about that. So this soil, it's probably manufactured to some extent. Going through, so to raise the pH, the liming we talk about. So if you want to do it immediate, a fast action, the more pulverized, So it's just ground up. Yep, you can do that. Or you can, I tend to like the pelletized lime to put down. But the thing I tend to do is that 100, if it's saying to put down 100 pounds per 1,000 square feet, you're not going to do it all. You don't want to do it all at once. You'll want to do it in halvesies. And I'll usually be putting it down now. And then I'll put it down again in the fall. Same thing kind of with nitrogen. All the fertilizers, you really want to be putting them down. The optimum time is not now. It's really in the fall to let them dissolve, get into soil profile, soil chemistry, let the microflora, microfauna do their thing. Soil testing can be done anytime in the dormant season from say leaf fall till about, till now. You can do it in the growing season. The problem is what's going on. Everything's growing from microflora and fauna to tree roots to flowers. And so those nutrients are in flux. And so if you're going to do it, you ought to do it consistently the same time each year. But what can screw up that? Climate, the weather pattern, if you do it dry versus a wet time. So the best time to do it is in the dormant time. Back to our lime at this time. This is also the time, even with trees. I don't know what they'll talk about with tree care. I talk about it in my tree care stuff is I'll aerate the soil now and core it to get that, help that infiltration and get the aeration going on my lawn. But it also will help. And then I'll put out this half treatment of lime if it calls for that. And that helps again, get it into the profile. And if I'm really low on pH, yeah, I might give it a little bit. I might do the pulverized to kind of get it going, but I like the slow and easy approach on something of that nature. I'm trying to think if there's anything else just in general to kind of say on some things. There's a whole host of other things, but I didn't want to get, again, I'm trying to stay at the 50,000 foot level for everything. Soil test. It's not going to tell you how deep the soil is. Okay. It's not going to tell you if it drains well. That's the perk test. It's not going to tell you if your plant's growing in that soil have a tested disease, if it has a disease. It won't tell you if I top there, you have to go to another analysis. You have to go to the plant diagnostic lab and they're going to look at the plant itself. But so a soil test won't tell you anything about disease. It's not going to tell you if it's full of rocks. Well, with the exception of my buddy in Taney County, I think anybody could kind of get that one figured out. It's not going to tell you if it's full of tree roots. That's the other thing I failed to mention. Really, when you're doing your soil tests, and if you watch that video, you do pull off that the organic matter, the sod piece, and you do pull out maybe the big roots, if you will. But the other pieces of organic matter, the finer pieces, yeah, you do want them in the soil. They'll be ground up. But usually, a lot of times, fertility issues, it's a result of tree roots. And the smaller stuff, the tree roots competing. It's just because what does it come down to? It really comes down to water availability. I won't say 9 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10. And I won't tell you anything about if it's rich with soil organisms, bacteria, fungi, earthworms. Now we do have it's called the SHAC, affectionately stands for SHAC, the Soil Health Assessment Center here at the university. And it's got not only regional, it's got, there's a few other labs like this around the country, but the folks up here are getting quite a reputation for all the things that they can do. And if you Google them, they'll have more information. And it won't tell you if there's chemical toxins. It won't tell you if you've got heavy metals. It won't tell you if you've got a pesticide. For stuff like that, you'd have to contact like the Department of Ag and that's a special test usually done. Or those private labs, yeah, they can do it, but those are usually super expensive. I won't say super expensive, more expensive than the others. Okay. Let's take a quick break then. I've got the other pieces, just what some of the amendments we can do. So do we have anything out there, Mark?
Yeah, we have a couple. So one is a real $1 million question, and let me see exactly how it's phrased. How would you improve soil after construction, compaction, or grading? And I sent out a link to Cornell's
Oh no,
what is
you're going to spoil me.
it?
That's in the next section.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the scoop and dump.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just saw Nina Bassick do a
Don't.
webinar about that, and
Okay, don't step on my line. Oh, he stepped on my lines. That's okay. I love you.
I love you too. Uh, so yeah, if you can elaborate on some of that stuff,
I will.
I know that's okay. So you're gonna
Yep.
okay, and then one other thing, someone just asked to elaborate on cation exchange capacity.
So just real simple, like I say, cation exchange capacity. It's the ability of the soil, and it's a function of organic matter, and it's a function of having having a nice proportion of clay and silt in that soil texture. And that is, it's just you need to have those sites that water adheres to, that then allows these positively charged nutrients to be dissolved in and adhere to, that the tree roots can then pull over when we have that field saturation or a little bit less, where water can freely move. Now, the other piece I didn't add on that I'll just dip my toe in, and that's pH. And that is because pH is a function of hydrogen ions, and hydrogen of H2O, that's the positive. So if you have a real acid soil, you have a ton of hydrogen. And so what happens is then those positive hydrogens kick off the positive nutrients and allows it to leach down and not be available for the plant. That's why pH is such a sensitive, but it is such an important piece to raise that pH or to lower that and get it in that range. And that's as far as I really need to go into it. But CEC is that cation exchange. Just think cation, think fertilizer, nutrients, and having that sweet spot of availability. And I'm sure you can Google things and have a whole lot better explanation, maybe a little bit more in depth than what I did here.
Yeah, it's
all right
complicated, but yeah, I think that's a good.
It is. It
You
really
don't need
is.
to know all the
No, you
finer
don't.
points of it to.
Yeah, I mean, people's heads swim at what we've done here. It's just mainly just trying to, I want to raise the level of awareness, or just make you realize that so when you get your soil test back, or you take it into the, because you can, if you go through the MU lab, you can go back to the extension office, Justin, you can say, Justin, what the hell is this? And he'll start talking, and he'll start saying those kind of words, and at least you won't have the deer in the headlights look. You can go, oh yeah, I remember Hank saying something about CEC.
All right, a couple more. Would you recommend soil testing for HOAs? We have cul-de-sac circles that are fertilized twice a year, spring and fall. A couple circles are located in rocky areas, and lower circles are in more soil friendly but clay areas. Not sure we are doing the right thing. Also add in the chemicals from snow removal.
Yeah, salts tend to do some things, some weird things to things. So HOA, homeowner associations, so common
Yeah.
areas. Yeah, that one. The plants will probably be telling you what's going on if on the salts. But yeah, you can do, and they will do. There is a test that can be done. So if you're really concerned about the salt situation, there is what they call a soluble salt test. Will actually tell you more. That's another piece of the puzzle I didn't get into here. I don't know. I probably not. I mean, unless you've got some plants, the trees that are really showing some effects that are close to one of those areas. But the homeowner association could look at that, particularly if I would say if they're applying fertilizer, if they're doing something that they've always done, or it sounds good, they should be doing a soil test just so they know, again, that, because they might be finding out, like I did, that they're wasting things, particularly when you get into common areas, and then you've got your backyard streams or your common area streams. And that's one thing we try to do with the, and you probably maybe worked with that, Mark, some, like municipalities and municipal workers, those common areas around parks and whatnot, and get, so we actually have one variant of our Healthy Yards for Clear Streams that we work with in Springfield, Missouri. And that's basically geared for the lawn care folks because they're the ones that are actually putting it out. And the other piece of the pie, so you got homeowners, the lawn care companies, and the one that we struggle with, and right now is because city governments are strapped for cash, but training the city workers that are putting things out, on on the public areas. So
All
ready,
right.
ready for the home stretch.
Let's see. We have, it looks like just a couple more quick questions here. So one, I've tried to eliminate chemicals in my yard, but have not found a good substitute for commercial crabgrass remover. I
Ah,
use Malorganite as my general fertilizer. Any
yeah,
problems with residual metals with that organic product?
boy, I don't know. I know well enough to know to say I don't know when I don't know, and I don't know on that one. I have to think on that to see milligranite. That's good one, but like I say, the thing I didn't mention, like I say on nitrogen, nitrogen is very it's it's based upon CEC and pH. They don't really do a test for it because it's such a labile. It's such a moving target. Nitrogen is used. It's turned over and consumed very, very fast. And so usually on lawns and things, they'll say put down a pound per 1,000 square feet. And if that's all your soil test says, that's all you put down. You don't put down a 10-10-10, or if you're deficient in phosphorus, don't, you can go out and get something what they call a superphosphate or a triple superphosphate. There are fertilizers out there that you can purchase maybe at a farm store. I went to big box stores and I thought for sure I'd find triple superphosphate out there, and I didn't, or just a phosphate piece. Phosphorus is needed for root development, and it's very immobile. But anyway, kind of got off tangent there. You just milligranite, crabgrass. That is that's a tough one, and I always defer that to Lee Miller, our turf grass specialist in our module that we do specifically on lawns.
Yeah, don't ask tree guys
Yeah,
about
no,
turf grass. We'll always just blow you off. So we have another one here. For soil samples, you suggested 8 to 10 samples. Do you keep each separate or dump all samples together before?
oh yeah. So I probably wasn't clear there. So within the area that you want, so within the area of if it's the pin oak or the large tree, you'll collect 8 samples. Again, your goal is to have at least 1 cup, if not 1 to 2 cups. Put those into a clean bucket, mix them all up, and then you grab your cup from that bulk sample. And so, but if you got, so it's first is what area do I want? Is it a vegetable garden? Is it my lawn in general? And I usually separate my backyard, front yard, because I got animals in the back, and that dynamic. I don't have large trees. One house that we did, I had kind of a clump of pin oaks and shingle oaks. Nothing really great about them, but I did. I just sampled around there, around the tree roots and that.
All right, we just have one more here. I've been composting in my garden for 30 years, which I bury compost as deep as 2 feet. My hope is that I'm offering plants an opportunity for deeper roots, better drainage, and available water and nutrients. Here's the meat of the question. Have I changed the soil texture or type?
You probably haven't changed the soil texture. You've done something with the organic matter. Um, it takes about 100 years to generate an inch of soil. And it takes us a couple minutes to screw it up. I mean, as far as when we redevelop things, but no, the soil chemistry you're probably altering in a good way, and you're just the soil health, that piece that we didn't really talk about here. Uh, you've done nothing but good for that. The compost. Now, was that what was it for? Was it a vegetable garden? Was it a garden more, or was it? Because you can take that compost, and again, in a young tree, think about where if you're mulching, you could put that compost and then put that mulch on top of the compost type thing, or work it in gently. Um, you don't want, and the compost is, what we say, mature. Folks uh, will tend to take wood chips or wood savings or sawdust and use that and that's green. It's really high. The carbohydrates, the carbon is really high. So what that does is it stimulates bacterial, microflora, microfauna. And what happens is they need nitrogen too. And I said, nitrogen is such a labile, fast turnover thing. That's when you can get nitrogen. You can just literally suck any nitrogen in the soil that's available into things that are growing. And then, usually the microflora and microfauna went out and your vegetable plants and your trees don't. So that's where it really becomes an issue of having to put down, really kind of monitor the nitrogen levels.
We have time for one more quick one before we
Okay.
proceed. All right. What is the ideal soil composition for fruit trees?
I wish Michelle Warman was here. She's our fruit specialist over on the Horde side. I don't know. I mean, a tree, I would, as far as the structure, I would want something in that textured triangle, that loamy soil. Anything, it could be a loamy sand, it could be a a clay loam. It could be anything in there. It really, the structure you're wanting to be, again, having in that middle spot. And then as far as the chemistry goes, that usually at least will be a good foundation for a balance, but then you'll have to do a soil test to see. But structure, yeah, that one there, it all starts with structure, and then the structure will set the foundation for the nutrients for the most part.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on then.
All right, will do. So what we're going to jump into now is so really just improving soil health. What we're going to talk here is, we got those mucky soils that don't drain well worth it all, that they hold the water too well, or clay soils that tend to dry out. We want to go from that to this, where we have aggregation, so good soil aggregates, where we do have macroflora, macrofauna, from earthworms on down to the bacteria and the fungi. They all have a place in that soil ecosystem. So, a few soils are ideal. Most need some work. The ideal soil. So really, again, it kind of goes back to having that medium texture that we talk about. Sufficient clay to hold that moisture, but not too much clay. And then having a permeable subsoil. It says deep there, I'll just settle for permeable. But then we've got, things like this, where we might need to correct the soil pH. We might need to increase the organic matter. Fertilizing according to the soil test. And so those first three, those are really functions of what a soil test will tell you. If you've got anything there that you really do need to alter in a good way. Then improving drainage. And that's the things that we talk about, with both the perk test and improving that permeability if we can. And we'll talk, there's limits to what you can and can't do, particularly when you start talking on a larger landscape across your yard versus, a raised garden bed or a flower bed. And let's not forget right plant, right place. Hopefully, if you've got that luxury, that's where you'll want to, well, let's get that one out of the way first. So here's a good example, this cherry tree. So wet feet, this thing died in a matter of weeks. Had 2 weeks of really rainy weather, this homeowner did. And you really can't tell here, but to the left, there's a little berm. So there's a swale here. And so it's just sitting in that trough. This is an altered soil. But could you have moved that cherry tree up, off and onto that berm? Just get roots out a little bit more. More than likely that could have saved it. Another thing you can do is if you've got the luxury to match the right plant to the right place. The botanical garden's got this really neat feature. Go out there and look for the plant finder. And so if you scroll down below this, if you've got specifics there that you want, you can put it in there. You can also look along the top, but if you scroll down, you got plant finder for dummies. And so if in this case here, I said, I want a Missouri native, I want a shade tree. Oh, and I've got clay soil. and then you can hit the search. Now you can imagine the more things you want, just like trying to find the perfect mate, the fewer choices you're probably going to have. But in this case here, it pulls up saying, well, there's our river birch. We've got, I don't know if I like box elder or not, but it's got box elder. It's got shagbark hickory. It suggested also catalpa, also suggested sugarberry and hackberry. So it can give you some ways that if you're looking for something. Also the Grow Native Network, another excellent source. And I'm not promoting one private enterprise over another, but Forest Keeling up in Ellsbury, they're probably the largest, well, they are the largest grown native nursery of hardwood and of trees rather, in the state and probably here in the Midwest. I don't know of anybody in Illinois or Iowa that is well versed as those folks are. So again, looking around there, and then you can also look around your neighborhood and see what your neighbors, what's worked well for your neighbor. I've got one planted in my front yard. It was known as the zone of death, the Bermuda Triangle of Death. I finally got a red maple to grow there, and now everybody's planting red maples as their calorie pairs and their green ashes are going out. And again, correcting pH issues. We want to be in that sweet spot, that 6 to 7. The lime can raise it, sulfur can lower it, those sorts of things. Interpreting the Missouri soil tests. Again, there's a good guide out there, several good guides that are out there. But again, in measuring and knowing, measuring not only your fertilizer, but measuring your yard that you're putting it on, or the area of the circle of your tree. Because again, these tests will come back in 1,000 square feet. And so you'll have to break out your chemical units and your units and kind of, get it right down to put it on a maybe per 100 square feet basis or whatever it might be that you're needing to apply. Increasing the organic matter, why do it? It does improve the physical condition. It will do again. Now this is more so, it'll have more of a greater impact, for our turf grasses. And as you get deeper, yeah, it can also for your gardens and your tree roots, but it's really going to have it most on the turf side. It will help though increase that water infiltration, getting the water into the soil profile. Can also, big one, again, decreasing erosion losses. It will also too, the mulch, that kind of like a mulch, if you will, kind of a layer, it will help maintain soil moisture. It does, again, organic matter is a critical factor in improving the plant nutrients. And there's our magical CEC again. So how to do it? There's a couple other ways, but for the trees, I don't collect my grass clippings. I do the first one of the season. I'll dethatch the yard, mow low, and suck up all the dead. And at the same time, and then I'll aerate the soil type at the same time. I'll mow leaves, tree leaves into the turf. Now, I can do that right now. I've got young trees, and I had a homeowner the other night saying, "Oh, I've got lots of mature trees." I say, "So, well, you kind of have to kind of thread the needle there. You're going to have, get rid of some of them, put them in a compost, but you could mulch an inch or two of leaves. You do that, and you'll probably get them down of mulching a lawnmower, half inch of chopped up leaves and whatnot. Homeowner associations maybe frown upon that, but fortunately, mine, I've kind of had to talk to them, and now they see the value in it, and they leave me alone and leave other people alone. You can use mulch when possible around those trees, within the drip line of the tree. Particularly if you've got a lot of trees, you're probably going to have issues if you're trying to grow fescue. You're not going to get a good turf grass. So you might be looking at some other ground cover. Folks tend to prefer ground covers as opposed to mulching out to the drip line, although I've had some folks do that, less to mow. This is the one we talk about, minimizing vehicle traffic, especially during or right after rainy weather. Folks that live in north of the Missouri River, our glacial tills, they tend to be really clay and silty. And so, yeah, one pass of a half-inch rain, and you can end up with something like this. If you have to do it, stay in the same lane. but we just say minimize it. The other thing that you can do to improve permeability, you can aerate the soil within the drip line of the canopy. Some folks, so that's an air spade that in the center there. So on the left, they'll actually just poke a hole and you'll see the soil lift up, and it just kind of, they call it fluff up. Are you destroying some fine roots right there where it is? Well, obviously, yeah, but you're loosening the soil. The vertical slits, the vertical aeration, that's another way to do it. You're not impacting those areas between, those pies, but you can rejuvenate a tree this way. I've seen large trees. I haven't seen too much of the vertical air spades. Maybe Mark has his urban environment. I know Spradley, Bill Spradley, his crew, and other folks there in the St. Louis area, they do that. They also do the one on the left, but I have seen it rejuvenate trees. Now I can't bring back a Lazarus tree or something that's got more than 50% of the canopy in serious decline for whatever, maybe it's another issue going on, but this can on a matured tree, showing those occasional flags. Yeah, this can really go a long way. And then what they do is they don't, obviously they will then put a composted soil, or they'll put something else in there to kind of get the microflora and microfauna going again. And then they can grow out and permeate into the untouched places. Now, this is something that Mark was talking about. Extreme cases. This is what they call scoop and dump. And this is what he referred to. The folks at Cornell are the pioneers in this. They really set this up for around their buildings on their campus, and we've got them here at MU and every place else. So new construction or whatever, just totally trash soils, compacted out the wazoo. So what they do is they will put down 6 or 8 inches of compost, of good composted material on top of wherever they're at. And then working from the back to the front, you can see he's already done the back. They will then take a bucket, and they'll use a small bucket. And the idea is he will go down through the material they just laid on top, down into that compacted soil, the depth of that bucket, scoop it up, lift it straight up, and dump it. And then they'll grade that. Then they'll go in and gently regrade that. And that has been proved really successful. I can't think of the professor, the extension professor's name up at Cornell that runs the lab up there. She's been up there for about 20 years, but she's also done research on those vertical air spades, the vertical aeration. And so she's got science to back up these techniques. So they're probably the leaders in urban soil rejuvenation. Highly recommend you going out there, and cool videos, really good information too. This tree here, well, the issue it had was it had clay. I mean, you can see, and these clay pockets can happen anywhere in these remanufactured or altered landscapes. The trees behind them aren't doing super great, but that tree there, it could have been a number of things going on, particularly with that much clay around. That's in the native soil. So that tree was, some containerized, maybe a balled and burlap, putting that. And so you imagine putting it in like a bathtub. I mean, those tree roots would never got out into that. I'm sure. And I could give Mark Turnabout fair play and step on the line. He'll probably do next week for planting proper tree, but I won't. Modifying heavy soils, though, you can see this. I will probably say this, he'll mention again in more detail next time. So I've seen this in our neighborhood. Unfortunately, it's calorie repairs, it seems like, in the green ashes, but our neighborhood was new and, heavy soils. So what they did is they would literally raise up the soil profile and then plant that with, putting good soil, the existing soil surface below. And that, at least that way, when the roots were coming out of that bald situation, that containerized situation, they had decent soil to kind of get a running start before they tried to invade Mother Earth that they would eventually are going to have to get into. more dramatic way, brick or other material, that's almost like a raised bed for a tree or a shrub. I wouldn't do that necessarily for a large tree, but if you got, a small statured tree or shrub, something of that nature could be something you could use. Another thing you can do, this is going to, improve some drainage. This is where you're going to have maybe areas of your lawn that you're wanting to pull water away from. It's not going to do anything for modifying that profile between these areas here. All it's going to do is I'm moving water from hopefully low areas to a lower area there in a pit, or I've even seen some of them where they'll do this. If it's got a low area in the backyard, they'll have a network like this, drain tile, make it like a French drain. This one here, they've got on the top of the surface, that image behind, they'd actually then allow turf to grow over it, but they had run it all the way out. I've had some homeowners run it all the way out to the storm drain in the front yard. You can imagine that is expensive. It's not going to help the wholesale situation. You're pulling water from specific areas that you want to pull water away from. So like I say, option, difficult, cost prohibitive, and you want to decide maybe on modification before selecting the plant material. Or hopefully, if I would do this, I might be thinking I'm going to select the material that's going to do well in that area and in that situation, and avoid it all the way. We really haven't talked about sandy soils too much because we really don't have a lot of them, but you could, there you're incorporating compost and organic material into the soil to help hold moisture. Again, you're wanting to increase that moisture capacity. And again, then choosing plants that are going to be suited to your soil drainage. It's usually going to be some sort of a pine. I won't say conifer, because spruces and whatnot, they tend to like, they'll take a sandy soil, but they tend to like a little bit of loam in there too. That's all I was going to say there. Closing couple of things, trending topics. So organic fertilizers, pros, often they'll have organic matter in them. They will tend to release gradually. They are less likely to pollute than inorganic fertilizers, because inorganic fertilizers are basically salts. Ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, potassium nitrate, and the list goes on. They tend to be more expensive. They take a little bit more time to apply, and oftentimes they will lack a fertility analysis. So you won't have that on a bag. Now, it's because they're just now beginning to, consumers are demanding that. And so the larger manufacturers, yep, they will provide. It might not be as detailed as some that you can get on some of the inorganic bags. Again, just because it's organic and it's kind of got that wild card in there. Some of the sources, so worm castings, and again, those numbers behind, that's just some ones that I looked at. The nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So they are lower. They will release gradually, but you've got everything there from back guano to fish meal, blood meal. That's usually that's your nitrogen piece. But there is a whole host of sources out there. Compost teas. Don't know if you know about that. So that's a mixture of nutrients. So and oxygen loving, and they'll do this. They'll grow it in a bacteria, fungi, nematodes, everything that's in a compost. And then what they do is they'll tie it in a bag, and then put it in a bucket, and they'll actually aerate it, because again, that's a living organisms in there, and then they're releasing their stuff, their excrements, into that water. And then, or you can do it in a bucket and you kind of stir it up. But the idea is you have to strain out the solids, and then it's that water, it's that tea, that's what they call the compost tea. So this one is really, it's not really for trees. I left it in here because you might see it. This is the one where there'll be, it can provide a nutrient boost, they say. It can, I'm saying it can include healthy microbes. They say, some folks will say, you can spray it on the plant leaves. It's not like an inorganic fertilizer that you can burn seriously. It might prevent or slow foliar spread of some diseases. Again, these are the claims. Better for potted plants. The cons on this are they're highly variable. They're messy to make. They're cheap. You can make your own if you decide to buy it. And there are compost teas out there. They tend to be fairly expensive, but there's no standard for this. This is kind of like west of the Pecos. Lots of home remedies. I equate compost teas to deer repellent remedies for landowners that have got walnut plantations, for everything from hanging deodorant soaps out, which tend to work for a while until the deer are get smart, to any rotten egg or any egg concoction that you can think of. Root stimulants, substances that help to ensure proper root development. Most contain hormones, similar to ones that are produced naturally by plants, which is why they're organic. They can help in proper and rapid root growth. These are things that can be things like even with mycorrhiza and whatever, but I'm saying these root stimulators, they're also usually in a dark material. Usually it's blackstrap molasses. So you're just getting more, just some kind of a nitrogen boost from that piece. You know, if you've got a good, healthy soil to begin with, probably the native organisms are going to overpower these. So do they have an effect? I say in those severely degraded landscapes where in an urban environment, you know, probably doesn't hurt. But in most other cases, I don't know how much help it gives. So organic conditioners, these are soil conditioners. So we already talked about organics, compost, peat moss, humates, you know, in there. Synthetics, those are the polymers that if you buy bare root seedlings from the Department of Conservation, they spray a polymer on the roots. It's basically a gel, and it's just kind of help hold moisture. And they can also, if putting in the soil, do help with moisture penetration. But some of those polymers can act like clay and actually hold. They don't hold it as tight as clay, but they can. The other one is mineral gypsum. So that's one we can use to raise. We don't have to worry about increasing calcium in Missouri. It's in most places, but you can use gypsum to raise the calcium if it does show low. Without raising pH. Otherwise, lime will do it. So you raise your pH and you do your lime at the same. Custom soil blends. Know a number of the commercial folks in St. Louis and in Kansas City and here in mid-Missouri. You know, they'll call them various things, garden mix, topsoil plus. Yeah, those are good. I mean, if you're one of you can afford it and want it, and they usually will have some kind of a soil analysis done, but you want to make sure that they provide that for you. But that's a quick and easy way if you haven't been composting like one of our participants tonight say, and have kind of grow your own. And with that, I know we're right at 8 o'clock. There is my shameless plug. If you go out, we'll be having something out on our MU Natural Resources Extension Facebook page, and we'll be getting word out. I'll send it out through Forest Relief when it is. It is a pain series. It's a cheap pain series, but what I do there, so we talk about toasting and wine and American versus English oaks. We move into charring and bourbon and effects there. We actually talk about how barrels are manufactured here in the state and then going out into the forest and what makes a stave tree and why we need to have more of our forest landowners in Missouri who own 80% of our forest lands. If we don't start managing for oak and hickory now, in 80 years, we're not going to have any because we have no regeneration going on right now. It's the unweeded garden. And with that, I do appreciate your listening. I know we're at the time, but I'm here for anything Mark wants to do.
Thanks a lot, Hank, and thanks for not stepping on my line there. You're a better man. You're a better man than I. So we only have one question as of now. Someone asked, so for altered landscapes, top dressing with compost, is this a good annual practice?
Doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt again, because depending upon how severe it has been, but you're kind of annually, what we say there is, um, if it's under, you can do a light till. You don't want to do heavy tilling, and because you're going to be destroying the root system, but also you want to keep those aggregates going. But again, if you stop and think, you're adding it on top. And so it takes 100 years to regenerate things. Um, at some point in time, well, at least organic matter and compost, that's better than soil. It's the pillow over the head. So again, you're going to have good aeration to happen to it. So not necessarily a bad thing in those really altered landscapes.
All right. We did have someone ask, why are oaks and hickories not regenerating? I know that's a pretty big question,
Nope,
but maybe just a quick.
it's very easy. It's like I mentioned, it's the unweeded garden. So here, points east, we have things like beech and maple that live underneath the shade of themselves. Oak, oak and hickory, we live in the oak hickory forest, but they need light. And so we do need to have prescribed fire. We do need to have harvesting happening. We need to have light to the forest floor to get those seedlings going. I think you have to have a whole lot of seedlings, usually 600 to 800 seedlings at the start of the game, to where you end up with those 35 mature oaks 80, 90 years down the road. And so here we tend to get all of our mid-story stuff, and it's shading the forest floor. And now it's even worse because we've got calorie pear, bush honeysuckle, and everything else. So landowners, we're recreational landowners. We tend to think if it's green, it's good. And we don't think decades out. So believe me, though, the distillers and the coopers, they're beginning to see this now. And that's what Extension is doing, not only here in this state, but across the Eastern United States. If folks go out and Google the White Oak Initiative, that's being led a charge from University of Kentucky, Ohio State, Purdue, and us.
So even if you hate trees, if you like whiskey and wine,
if you like whiskey and wine, it takes about 80 years minimum to produce a tree of size for a barrel, to produce a barrel.
Then we had someone else kind of related. Someone asked if the red oaks in state forests are still dying off en masse.
Yes, and now well, not as much. It kind of goes in cycles. We do have oak decline. We have something now called rapid white oak mortality on the white oak side of things, which is kind of spooky. But a lot of that is the fact that we say we are growing 3 times more wood than we're harvesting on a per acre basis. So again, too many trees on our thin Ozark soils that we screwed up at the turn of the 19th century and 20th century. So we'll make it, but we're facing some serious issues.
Thanks. And yeah, I mean, that's something that's always hard to explain to tree lovers, that sometimes cutting trees down is the best thing for trees, but
we are blessed
sometimes it
here.
is.
We are blessed here in Missouri because we're on the fringe of the Great Plains. So our sites tend to be drier. So even though, I mean, Pioneer Forest, we do uneven age management and we can do that. But you go east and it can't be done. It has to really open up the forest a little bit more than that to get any kind of regeneration going. So it keeps the foresters busy, which I like. I really appreciate it. Well, we haven't lost that many folks. And like I say, you've got I didn't put up my contact information, but Mark can get you to me if you have any questions. And anything that we do will be passing. We pass out through Forest Relief. We do other of extension series. We just got through doing a winter webinar series. We'll do a summer webinar series, more geared towards woodland owners. But my counterpart, Sarah Havens, she's got a series, a network starting Women Owning Woodlands. So it's no guys allowed. She handles it all. And she's working with a lot of the other female foresters, not only in Missouri, but across the country. And that's kind of neat to see.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll make sure we had a couple questions about your the white oak and whiskey. I'll make sure to get that out. So please get that to me. I'll include everything in the next email I send out. I'll send that out as soon as you get it to me.
I've got to work on that, but I'll get that out. And again, anytime. I come out to the nursery all the time for forest relief. So it was in my backyard there at Creve Coeur. So you guys do an awesome job. Can't encourage you all enough to help out relief on that. That's just a fantastic organization.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Hank. Thanks for doing this. This is a really great presentation. I really hope I can fit that white oak whiskey into my schedule this spring, because that sounds like it's going to be a really great program. So,
All right. Well, you all take care. Enjoy the
right.
spring weather.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.